I always wake up at 5:30 in the morning without even looking at my watch. It's an old habit, developed over 42 years in the crime lab. When you're dealing with evidence, tardiness is unacceptable. Every minute could cost justice a chance to prevail. The first thing I put on is my robe, a dark blue one with the HP monogram on the breast pocket, a gift from Lorraine for our 35th anniversary. She passed away 2 months after that. A sudden aneurysm. No goodbyes, no long goodbyes, no gradual fading away. Just an empty bed next to her and a life divided into before and after. My home in Eastport is an exact replica of my inner world. Perfect order, a place for everything. Having lived here for 37 years, I know every crack in the ceiling, every creak of a floorboard. A red brick house built in 1940 with 3 bedrooms and a small garden. Too big for one person, but to sell it would be to part with the last tangible memories of a full family. I make tea, black, strong, no sugar, and step out onto the veranda. The December air bites my cheeks with cold. Eastport wakes up reluctantly, especially in the days before Christmas. The town is small but has character, old streets, Victorian architecture, and the seaport that gives it its name. Once thriving with fishing and small shipyards, it now survives on tourists in seasonal festivals. I was born here and will probably die here. At 7 o'clock, I start my daily routine. Prepare breakfast, oatmeal with dried fruit, check the mail, look at the morning paper. Few of my generation still prefer paper publications, but I find something soothing in the rustling of the pages. A forensic habit. Paper materials cannot be altered imperceptibly, unlike digital materials. Today, I deviated from my schedule. A bright red envelope caught my eye, too festive among the invoices and advertising brochures. When I opened it, I found a glossy card with a Christmas wreath on it. Inside was calligraphic but clearly typewritten text. Dear Dad, you are invited to Christmas dinner on December 25th at 6 o'clock this evening. Love, Ambrose, and Kendall. The invitation looked professional and impersonal, as if it were from a travel company rather than my own son. I ran my finger over the signature, knowing the handwriting wasn't Ambrose's. He'd never been a master calligrapher. His handwriting had always been sprawling and sloppy, which had often been the subject of our arguments when he was in school. With love is a formal phrase devoid of content. When was the last time we talked about love? Perhaps at Lorraine's funeral, when I awkwardly hugged my son and he patted me on the back like a casual acquaintance. Ambrose is my pride and my greatest disappointment. A smart boy who could have been anything he wanted to be, but chose to work for the municipal water department. It's not that I thought the job was unworthy. I've always respected the people whose hands build the infrastructure of our civilization. But I saw in him the potential for more. Maybe that was my mistake. Expecting too much? I set aside the invitation and look at the silver frame photo on the table. Ambrose in his graduation robe, receiving his engineering degree. Lorraine is standing next to him, glowing with pride, and I'm keeping just behind him with a barely perceptible smile. It was our last truly happy day all together. After Lorraine's death, it was as if my son and I had lost common ground. She had always been the bridge between us, translating my reticence into caring, his rebelliousness into a desire for independence. Without her, we were on different shores, not knowing how to reach each other. And then there was Kendall. I remember the day Ambrose introduced her to me. It was in the summer, 3 years ago. They dropped by unannounced, catching me in the garden pruning roses. Kendall got out of the car first, tall, slender, with impeccable hair and a smile that didn't affect her eyes. Dad, this is Kendall Farrow, Ambrose said then, with a nervousness I noted immediately. Dash, my girlfriend. She held out her hand to shake, and I noticed the perfect manicure and the large stone ring on her right hand. It wasn't fake, but it wasn't antique either. New expensive jewelry designed to impress. Dash, Mr. Pringle, I've heard so much about you. Her voice sounded sincere, but her eyes glanced appraisingly at the front of the house, the grounds, my clothes. I invited them to tea, and even then I noticed how Kendall controlled the conversation. She talked about her work in luxury real estate, the clients she dealt with, her ambitions. Ambrose sat next to her, occasionally inserting a word, but mostly looking at her with admiration. My experience as a forensic scientist has taught me to see what people try to hide. Small gestures, micro expressions, unconscious movements, all of these make up the true portrait of a person. And Kendall's portrait alarmed me. 6 months later, they were married. The ceremony was lavish, clearly beyond the means of a municipal employee. I paid for half the expenses, though I was barely involved in the planning. The wedding was like a glossy magazine template, perfect and impersonal. After the wedding, our meetings became infrequent and formal. Monthly lunches where Kendall made small talk and Ambrose kept quiet. Sunday phone calls that grew shorter and shorter. And then they stopped too. I spent the last 2 Christmases alone. The first time I called them with an invitation, but Kendall politely explained that they already had dinner plans with her parents in Fremont. The second year, I didn't impose myself, just mailed gifts and received a formal thank you card. And now this invitation. Why now? What had changed? The doorbell jerked me out of my musings. On the doorstep stood Myrtle Collier, my neighbor on the right, 72 years old, widow of Colonel Collier, with whom she lived for 40 years. She had been here when Lorraine and I moved into our house, had seen Ambrose grow up, had brought the first cash register after my wife's funeral. "Hubert, you didn't answer the knock, so I took the liberty of calling," she said, holding out a basket of homemade cookies. Christmas cookies, my grandmother's recipe. I invited her in, knowing refusal would be futile. Myrtle is the only person in Eastport who isn't afraid of my reticence. She proceeded into the kitchen, put on the kettle, and began arranging cookies on a plate as if she were in her own home. "Did you get an invitation from Ambrose and that woman?" she asked, nodding at the red envelope on the table. "How did you know?" "Saw the mailman delivering the same ones all over the street. She sent them out to all her clients and acquaintances. She's throwing some kind of big party, apparently." That explained the formality of the invitation, but it made me wonder even more. Was I just one of many guests, a name on a long list of invitees? "Are you going to go?" Myrtle asked, sitting down across from me with a cup of tea. "I don't know," I answered honestly. She looked at me appraisingly. "Hubert, we've known each other for 37 years. You're going. Because you're always hoping to make things right with your son, even if you don't admit it to yourself." Myrtle had always been a straightforward person, bordering on tactless. But she was right. Despite the years of estrangement, Ambrose remained my only son, my flesh and blood, my last link to Lorraine. After Myrtle left, I sat for a long time with the invitation in my hand. A plan began to form in my mind. If it was an attempt at reconciliation, I should respond accordingly. If it's just a formal gesture, well, at least I'd know for sure. The next day I went to the Eastport Mall. I usually avoid it, especially before Christmas. But the situation demanded an exception. For Ambrose, I chose a collector's edition of books on the history of water supply engineering. He's always been fascinated by the history of his profession. For Kendall, the selection process was more difficult. After much deliberation, I decided on an elegant scarf from a designer whose name didn't tell me anything. But the saleswoman assured me that it was the hottest trend of the season. The price was impressive, but it didn't matter. I wanted the gift to speak of my respect and acceptance. Once home, I spent a disproportionate amount of time wrapping it. Every fold of paper, every curve of ribbon had to be perfect. Lorraine always laughed at my obsession with detail. "Hubert, you're the only person who can turn wrapping a gift into a forensic investigation." The memory of her laughter pierced my heart with unexpected pain. 10 years have passed, and I can still hear her voice. I wonder if Ambrose hears it. Does she remember singing him lullabies, teaching him to ride his bike, defending him to me when I was too strict? Finished with the wrapping, I put the presents on the dresser in the living room, where they would wait for Christmas Day. 5 days left until dinner. 5 days to prepare myself for any outcome. I was under no illusions. I knew one meeting wouldn't mend years of estrangement, but perhaps it would be a start. As Lorraine had said, sometimes all you have to do is open the door and let the fresh air in. Everything else will fall into place. That night I pulled out the family album, a heavy leather-bound album. I flipped through the pages, watching Ambrose change from a smiling baby to a serious young man. The pictures became rarer and rarer after high school, and the last picture was taken at a wedding, a formal shot of us standing next to each other, but not touching. What do I expect from this Christmas dinner? Reconciliation? Perhaps that's too optimistic, but at least a chance to see that my son is doing well, that the life he has chosen makes him happy. With that thought, I closed the album and went to bed, feeling something resembling hope for the first time in a long time. 3 days before Christmas, I began to have doubts. Sitting in front of the fireplace with a glass of whiskey, the only weakness I allow myself, I went over the events of the past few years, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong between Ambrose and me. Our relationship had never been easy. After leaving the police force, I taught forensics at a local college, and perhaps too often brought work habits home with me. Analyzed my son's every act, every decision, every friendship. Lorraine called it my X-ray eye, the ability to see through, but the inability to simply accept. Now, years later, I realized my mistake. What the son needed was not an analyst, but a father. Not criticism, but support. I was doing what I thought was right, but apparently right and necessary are different things. And then Kendall came along. That was almost 4 years ago. After years of widowhood, I decided to invest some of my savings in real estate. A forensics expert's pension was decent enough, especially considering my frugality, but an extra income never hurts. Besides, I was looking for something to do to fill the empty hours. The annual Eastport Real Estate Show was held in the old pavilion by the harbor. I'd taken Ambrose with me. I wanted to get my son involved in investing, to show him that there were ways to secure a future beyond the daily grind of municipal work. Kendall stood at the premium estate booth, dressed in an impeccable ivory suit, tablet in hand. Her smile turned on and off as if on cue, bright for potential clients, indifferent for the rest of us. "May I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, instantly assessing us with her gaze. The nice suit and watch I wore apparently signaled solvency. "I'm looking at investment options," I replied, accepting the booklet. "Then you've come to the right place." "Kendall Farrow," she extended her hand, and I noted the firm, business-like handshake. She spent the next 20 minutes talking passionately about the benefits of investing in waterfront real estate, the rising prices, and the possibility of renting out properties. I asked specific questions about taxes and maintenance costs, and she answered clearly, knowledgeably. Ambrose stood nearby, clearly bored, until she turned her attention to him. "Are you an investor too?" she asked with the same practiced smile. "No, I work in water supply," he replied, and I noticed her interest wane a little. "I design filtration systems for the city's water supply." "How interesting," she said in a tone that clearly said otherwise. But then something changed in her gaze when I mentioned the budget I was willing to allocate for the investment. Her gaze slid between Ambrose and me, and her smile grew warmer. "You must be father and son?" "The family resemblance is obvious. Dash Hubert Pringle," I introduced myself, "and my son Ambrose." "Nice to meet you." Her gaze lingered on Ambrose, and I saw him blush slightly. My son had always been vulnerable to a woman's attention. Too infrequent, too eager. We arranged to meet the following week to look at specific objects. As we left the exhibit, I noticed Kendall giving Ambrose her business card. "For direct contact," she said. A week later, I went to the site visits alone. Ambrose cited a work emergency. But that same evening, he called to say he'd met Kendall for lunch, purely by chance, and they'd had a wonderful conversation. A month later, they were officially dating. After 2 more, Ambrose invited her to dinner at my house. I set the table in the dining room, which I'd rarely used since I'd been alone. Pulled out Lorraine's finest china, silverware, crystal glasses. Wanted to impress, to show that the Pringle family had tradition and dignity, even if we didn't flaunt it. Kendall appreciated the service. I noticed the way her eyes lingered on the silver, the way she turned the plate over, checking the maker's mark. "What a lovely home, Mr. Pringle," she said, looking around the room. "So much space for one person." "The house holds our family history," I replied, pouring the wine. "Dad's lived here since before I was born," Ambrose put in. "And you plan to stay?" she asked with a carelessness that didn't deceive me. "I don't see any reason to change anything yet," I answered, watching her reaction. Over dinner, we talked about her work, her recent deals, the potential of the real estate market. I asked about her family, and she answered briefly. Parents in the Boston suburbs, father a former banker, mother a housewife. No brothers or sisters. "I always knew I had to rely on myself," she said, and I sensed sincerity in that confession. No one can give you what you don't take for yourself. Ambrose looked at her with admiration. My quiet, executive son, always looking for approval, absorbed her words like a sponge. She was everything he wasn't: confident, ambitious, driven. After dinner, Ambrose helped me with the dishes while Kendall looked around the house. Later, I discovered that my desk drawer in the study was slightly pulled out, where I kept the deeds to the house and other papers. Nothing was missing, but the fact remained that she was looking for information. Shunnam, she's amazing, isn't she? Ambrose said as they drove away. I nodded, not wanting to mar his happiness with my suspicions. After all, what could I say? Son, that woman is interested in you because of me in my house? It would have sounded like the paranoia of a jealous father. Their relationship developed rapidly. Within 6 months, Ambrose announced their engagement. I proposed Lorraine's ring, an antique sapphire ring that had belonged to my grandmother, but Kendall politely declined. That's so sweet, Mr. Pringle, but Ambrose and I already have a ring. She displayed a diamond that I was sure was worth at least 3 months of my son's salary. The wedding was set for the spring. I offered to help financially, knowing that Ambrose's modest income wouldn't support the gala Kendall dreamed of. That's very generous of you, she said. Ambrose and I really appreciate your support. Interestingly, she spoke for both of them, even though my son was standing next to her. It had become the norm. She spoke, he was silent. The wedding preparations turned into quite a spectacle. Kendall handled everything from choosing the venue to the menu, from the flowers to the music. Ambrose just went along with it. I tried to talk to him privately to ask him if he really wanted such a lavish ceremony, but there was no opportunity. Kendall was always there for me. The wedding was at the best hotel in Eastport. 200 guests, barely a tenth of whom I knew. Kendall was radiant in a dress that one of Ambrose's aunts whispered to me cost as much as a used car. My son looked happy, but somehow lost amidst all the splendor. During the reception, Kendall introduced me to her colleagues and clients. This is Ambrose's father, a former forensic scientist. He has a lovely home in historic Eastport. Always this emphasis on the house, like it was my greatest asset or accomplishment. The day after the wedding, before the newlyweds left on their honeymoon trip, I gave them a gift, a check for a substantial sum. For a down payment on a house, I explained. Every family should have a nest egg. Kendall looked at the check with ill-concealed disappointment. The amount was generous, but obviously not what she'd expected. Thanks, Dad, Ambrose said, hugging me. This will help us a lot. Yes, thank you, Kendall echoed. And I noticed the way she squeezed her husband's elbow, too hard for it to be just a gesture of affection. They'd bought a house in a new neighborhood in Eastport, a modern one, with big windows and minimalist design, the complete opposite of my traditional dwelling. I was invited to the housewarming party, a formal event with champagne and canapes, more like a client presentation than a family celebration. How did you like the house? Ambrose asked when we were able to talk without Kendall, who was busy with other guests. Modern, I replied diplomatically. Lots of light. Kendall says it's a good investment. The neighborhood is up and coming, and prices are only going to go up. Do you like it? I asked, watching his face. He hesitated, then nodded. Sure, it's what Kendall wanted, and she knows better than I do about these things. After the housewarming party, our communication became even more infrequent. I called on Sundays, but often Kendall answered, explaining that Ambrose was busy or on vacation. When I did manage to talk to my son, it was superficial, about work, the weather, vacation plans, which they always spent with Kendall's parents, but never with me. I tried to make contact, taking them out to dinner, offering to help around the house, inquiring about their lives, but every initiative was met with a polite refusal or a formal agreement, followed by a last-minute cancellation. One day I arrived unannounced, carrying a box of tools. Ambrose had mentioned they were having plumbing problems. Kendall opened the door with obvious distaste. Hubert, what a surprise. Unfortunately, Ambrose is at work right now. I know, I replied, picking up the toolbox. He's here to fix the faucet. Ambrose said it was leaking. Oh, we already called a plumber. She blocked the entrance without inviting me in. Serofarnum, but thank you for your concern. Through the window, I saw people sitting in the living room, apparently clients or friends. and I heard my son's voice from the back of the house. "Is Ambrose home?" I asked, knowing the answer. She blushed slightly. "He just arrived. We have a meeting with potential clients, a very important one. I'll tell him you stopped by." From that moment on, I stopped imposing. I called once a month, sent holiday greetings, but I stopped visiting. My pride didn't allow me to beg for my own son's attention. The first Christmas after their wedding, I received an invitation to dinner. But when I arrived, I found it wasn't a family celebration, but a cocktail party for Kendall's business associates. Ambrose had been on the sidelines all evening, filling glasses and making small talk at his wife's behest. I left early, citing fatigue. The second and third Christmases, no invitations followed. I sent gifts, books for Ambrose, jewelry for Kendall, and received formal thank you cards. And now, after 2 years of silence, this unexpected invitation. I hesitated. Should I go or not? What was behind this gesture? Was it a real desire to mend relations or some ulterior motive? The deciding factor was a call from Ambrose the day before Christmas. It wasn't Kendall, but my son who called me for the first time in months. "Dad," his voice sounded strained. "Did you get our invitation?" "Yes, thank you. Are you coming?" I sensed a sincere hope in that question. "Of course," I answered without hesitation. 6 o'clock tonight, right?" "Yes." He hesitated a moment, then added, "I'll be glad to see you." That brief conversation gave me hope. Maybe my son really missed me. Maybe it was his initiative to invite me. Maybe after 3 years of marriage, he was finally starting to make his own decisions. On the morning of December 25th, I got up earlier than usual. I shaved my face, put on my best suit, dark blue, almost black, with a barely visible stripe. I put on the silk tie Lorraine had given me for our last anniversary. I shined my shoes, packed gifts in the trunk books for Ambrose and a scarf for Kendall. Mentally prepared topics of conversation, trying to avoid potentially conflicting ones. Politics, religion, investments. I decided to focus on the neutral. Weather, city news, plans for the new year. Before leaving, I looked at myself in the mirror. A gray-haired man with a straight back and a wary look. Collected, prepared, but visibly nervous. I pulled on my jacket, adjusted my tie, and took a deep breath. "It's time," I said to my reflection. A light snow was falling outside the window. Christmas Eastport glowed with lights and decorations. I drove down familiar streets, past festive storefronts and decorated trees. The radio played classic Christmas tunes, reminding me of the times when Lorraine, little Ambrose, and I would gather around the fireplace, drinking hot chocolate and exchanging gifts. The closer I drove to my son's house, the tighter something inside clenched. Hope struggled with foreboding. I wanted to believe in the best, but years as a forensic scientist had taught me to expect the worst. When you're dealing with evidence and proof, optimism is an unacceptable luxury. But today, I wasn't a forensics expert. I was just a father on his way to his son's Christmas dinner, and I allowed myself to hope. As I pulled up to Ambrose and Kendall's house, I immediately noticed an unusual excitement. The entire street was lined with cars, and not just any cars, but a veritable exhibition of luxury. A black Mercedes with tinted windows, the latest BMW, even a Porsche, bright red like a lollipop in a Christmas stocking. I parked my modest Volvo at the end of the block. There was no closer and mentally wished I'd brought an umbrella. The snow was intensifying, turning the air into a shimmering veil. The decorative lights along the street colored the snowflakes in shades of red and green, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Taking the gift bags out of the trunk, I slowly made my way toward my son's house. Each step was difficult, not because of the slippery road, but because of the anxiety growing inside me. My experience as a criminalist had taught me to pay attention to details, and now they were adding up to an unpleasant picture. Ambrose and Kendall's mansion shone like a Christmas card. Every window glowed with warm light. Garlands twinkled on the roof and along the fence, and an inflatable Santa almost 2 meters tall stood at the entrance. Next to the house stood a live Christmas tree, decorated not with toys but with glass balls, each the size of a grown man's fist. Everything screamed money and status, too much so for a humble water engineer and real estate agent. There was music coming from the house and the sounds of crowded revelry. I glanced at my watch. 5 minutes past 7. I was only 5 minutes late, but judging by the noise, the party had been in full swing for quite some time. Walking up to the porch, I rang the doorbell. I waited, shuffling from foot to foot, feeling the snow settling on my shoulders and hair. No one opened. I rang again, longer. Finally, the door swung open, releasing a wave of warmth, smells of food, and loud music outside. On the threshold stood Kendall, dressed in a tight red dress, with perfect hair and a glass of champagne in her hand. At first, her face had the professional smile of a hostess, but when she saw me, she couldn't hide her irritation. Hubert? Her voice sounded like I was the last person she expected to see. Good evening, Kendall. I tried to smile. Merry Christmas. She didn't step back to let me inside. Instead, she looked over her shoulder, as if checking to see if any of the guests could see us, and closed the door slightly, leaving only a narrow slit. What are you doing here? She asked, lowering her voice. I blinked, not understanding the question. I got an invitation to Christmas dinner, 6 o'clock at night. Her face changed, not softened. No, but an expression of unconcealed irritation. Oh, that. She waved her hand with her glass, a few drops of champagne falling onto the porch. It was a standard invitation. We sent them out to everyone. Ambrose called yesterday, I insisted, asked if I was coming. Her eyes narrowed. So there's been a misunderstanding. We're having a business meeting. Partners, clients, people from the municipality, she said in a tone that made it clear I didn't belong here. I stood there clutching the bags of gifts, feeling the snow melting on my face, mixing with something I hoped she would recognize as melting snowflakes rather than tears. I brought presents, I said, lifting the packages as proof of my good intentions. Kendall sighed with obvious impatience. Hubert, you don't understand. This is an important night for my career. Potential investors for a new project are here, people on whom my future depends. I'll just hand over the gifts and say hello to Ambrose. I tried to speak calmly, though my insides clenched with humiliation. Ambrose is busy, she cut him off. He's entertaining the guests. This isn't a family dinner, Hubert. This is business. I stepped forward, trying to peer through the gap between the door and the jamb. I want to see my son. Kendall stood up straight, blocking my view. Why are you here? You're not welcome here. Her voice was low but sharp as a whip. We have a life of our own, and you have no place in it. When will you finally realize that? At that moment, the door behind her opened wider, and I saw Ambrose. He was standing in the back of the hallway, glass in hand, wearing an expensive suit I'd never seen before. Our eyes met, and for a split second I thought he was about to step up, to intervene, to protect his father from this public humiliation. But he only looked away and slowly turned away, disappearing into the back of the house, where the laughter and music continued uninterrupted. Ambrose! I called out, but my voice was drowned out by the noise of the party. Kendall took the moment to start closing the door. I'll tell him you stopped by. I'll give him the presents too. She held out her hand, expecting me to hand over the packages. I took a step back, clutching my burden tighter. No, I said quietly. I'll hand them over myself, some other time. Her face contorted with anger, but she quickly got over herself, returning a professional smile. Suit yourself, and she closed the door, leaving me alone on the snowy porch. I stood looking at the closed door, listening to the muffled sounds of merriment coming from the house. The snow continued to fall, settling on my shoulders and hair, but I didn't feel cold. A flame was burning inside me, not anger, but deep, burning bitterness and frustration. Slowly, as if in a dream, I turned and walked down the porch. Each step was painful, not in my joints, but somewhere deeper in my heart. I walked down the snowy street, past the luxury cars, past the festively decorated homes where families gathered to share the warmth and joy of Christmas. My family. Where is it now? Lorraine left 10 years ago, and now I've finally lost my son as well. Ambrose had chosen his path, and there was no place for me in that path. Reaching my car, I carefully placed the gift bags in the back seat. I got behind the wheel, but I didn't start the engine. I just sat there looking at the falling snow, listening to a quiet Christmas tune from the neighbor's house. I don't know how long I sat like that, immersed in my thoughts. The daze was interrupted by the ringing of my cell phone. I pulled it out of my pocket and saw the name on the screen. Theodore Graves. My old friend, Merry Christmas. His voice sounded warm and sincere. I'm calling to wish you happy holidays. How is your evening going? I didn't answer at once. There was a lump in my throat that prevented me from speaking. Hubert, he sounded worried. Are you all right? No, I finally said. I'm not okay, Ted. What's wrong? His tone changed from celebratory to businesslike in an instant. I was just at Ambrose and Kendall's. I began, and the words flowed. I told him about the invitation, about my hopes, about the scene on the doorstep, about the son who turned away. With each word, the pain subsided, replaced by something like cold determination. Theodore listened in silence, not interrupting. When I finished, he sighed heavily. I'm sorry, Hubert. No one deserves to be treated like that, especially by their own children. I tried, Ted, I said quietly. God knows I've tried to mend the relationship, but there's a limit to how much humiliation a man can take. What are you going to do? I watched the snowflakes slowly melt on the windshield, turning into droplets that dripped down like tears. I want to change my will. The words came out loud and clear. Everything I own, the house, the savings, the investments, I want to disinherit Ambrose and Kendall. That's a big decision, Theodore said cautiously. Maybe we should wait. Give yourself time to cool down and think about it. I've been thinking about this for 3 years, Ted. 3 years of watching my daughter-in-law manipulate my son, alienate him from me, try to get her hands on my money. Today I saw my son make his choice. He chose her, her ambition, her world. I am not in that world. The silence in the tube lasted for a few seconds. Then Theodore asked, Are you sure? Absolutely, I answered, surprised at the firmness of my voice. When can we meet? Tomorrow morning in my office. Would 10 o'clock suit you? Yes, I started the engine. Thanks, Ted. And I'm sorry I ruined your holiday party. What are you talking about? That's what friends are for. I'll see you tomorrow. I put the phone on the passenger seat and turned on the windshield wipers, brushing the snow off the windshield. I drove slowly out of the parking lot and headed home. My house greeted me with silence and darkness. I didn't turn on the hallway light, preferring the semi-darkness. I left the gift bags at the front door. I'd decide what to do with them later. Now I had my office, an old armchair, and a bottle of Macallan whiskey that I kept for special occasions. Today seemed to be such an occasion. Pouring the whiskey into a heavy crystal glass, I sat in a chair by the window and watched the snow fall. The city outside the window was decorated with lights, but they seemed distant and alien, like stars in space. I thought about Lorraine. What would she say when she saw what our family had become? How would she handle the situation? Lorraine always had a knack for finding the right words, for softening angles, for seeing the good in even the darkest of situations. You can't make people love you, Hubert. I felt as if I heard her voice. But you can make them respect your boundaries. My hand holding the glass trembled slightly. I took a sip, feeling the warmth spreading through my body but not reaching my heart. In my professional life, I'd always followed facts, not emotions. Analyze evidence, draw conclusions, present evidence. Now I have applied the same approach to a personal situation. Fact. My son allowed his wife to humiliate me. Fact. He didn't stand up for me, he turned away. Fact, despite my attempts to mend the relationship, he chose to distance himself from me. Conclusion, he made his choice consciously. The decision I made to change my will was not motivated by anger or a desire for revenge. It was a logical consequence of what had happened. Why should a man who turned his back on me when I was alive get something after I die? I finished my whiskey and set the glass on the table. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, I would meet with Theodore and do what I should have done long ago. Protect myself from those who saw me only as a source of potential inheritance. The bitterness and disappointment still burned inside me. But there was something akin to relief, like I'd finally taken off the heavy backpack I'd been carrying for too long. Perhaps that's the real Christmas present, the release of illusions and false hopes, acceptance of reality as it is. I rose from my chair and walked to the window. The snow continued to fall, covering Eastport in a white blanket, as if trying to hide the imperfections of the world. But I knew the truth. Beneath that perfect whiteness, everything was still the same. For the first time in years, I felt absolute clarity. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter of my life, a chapter without false hopes and self-deception. I dialed Theodore's number again. Sorry for the late call, but I want you to prepare all the necessary documents for tomorrow's meeting. Everything will be ready, he answered without hesitation. Are you sure you want to rule them out completely? Absolutely sure. My voice sounded calm and determined. It's time to close this chapter once and for all. Theodore Graves' office was in an old building on Main Street, just a few blocks from the city courthouse. A modest sign reading Graves Law Practice was the only indication that behind the heavy oak door was one of the most respected law offices in Eastport. I arrived at 9:50, punctual as ever. Theodore's secretary, Mrs. Porter, a gray-haired woman who had worked with him for over 25 years, greeted me with a polite smile. Mr. Graves is expecting you, Mr. Pringle, she said as she escorted me to the study. May I offer you some coffee? Thank you, Agnes, I replied. Black, no sugar. Theodore rose from his desk as I entered. A tall man with a neat haircut and shrewd gray eyes. He'd been a friend of mine since we were both just starting our careers. He as an assistant district attorney, me as a junior forensic scientist. Hubert, he shook my hand. How are you feeling today? I could hear in his voice the careful concern that is usually reserved for the seriously ill or the recently widowed. Better than yesterday, I replied, sitting down in the leather chair across from his desk. Clarity of thought has its advantages. Theodore nodded and pulled from his desk drawer a thick folder labeled Pringle H, my will and related documents. I've prepared everything we need as we discussed, he said, laying out the papers. But before we begin, I have to ask again, are you sure you want Ambrose completely out of the will? We could look at alternatives. For example, a conditional trust that would pay him a certain amount if specific conditions were met. I shook my head. No conditions, Ted. That would only prolong the bond which I want to sever completely. Theodore took off his glasses and wiped them with a handkerchief, buying time to formulate his next question. Aren't you afraid you might regret this decision later, when the emotions have subsided? It's not about emotions. I straightened up in my chair. Yesterday's incident was just the last straw. I can no longer ignore the obvious. My son has given up on me, on our family, on everything I've tried to teach him. Theodore sighed and put his glasses back on. Okay, but as your lawyer and friend, I must warn you that such decisions sometimes lead to protracted litigation. Complete disinheritance of a direct descendant can be challenged in court. Let him challenge it. My voice sounded firmer than I expected. He will have no grounds. I'm sane, uninfluenced, and I have every legal right to dispose of my property as I see fit. And to whom do you want to leave your property? That question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about alternative heirs. Who would receive what I had accumulated over a lifetime? I had no other children, brothers or sisters. Yeah, I'm not sure, I admitted. Sonnen. Maybe some kind of foundation or charitable organization? Theodore nodded. That's a reasonable choice. There are several worthy local organizations. The Eastport College Development Foundation, for example, or St. Margaret's Children's Hospital. The Children's Hospital, I decided after a brief thought. Lorraine would love it. Good, Theodore made a note. I'll prepare all the necessary documents. In the meantime, let's discuss your current will. We spent the next hour reviewing my financial and property assets. A house that had appreciated in value by a significant amount due to its historic status and location. An investment portfolio that I've carefully built up over the last 30 years. Insurance, retirement savings, a collection of antiquarian forensic books I've collected all my life. An impressive inheritance, Theodore said, looking at the last page. Ambrose and Kendall are losing a considerable amount of money. Money they didn't earn, I replied, and one that Kendall would no doubt dispose of as she saw fit, taking my son out of the equation as soon as possible. Theodore looked at me with mild surprise. Do you really think so poorly of your sister-in-law? I don't think, I observe, was one of my professional mantras. From the first day I met her, she was only interested in the material side of my life. Remember I told you about the incident after the operation? Theodore nodded. Vaguely, refresh my memory. I leaned back in my chair, returning to the painful memory. It was a year and a half ago. I'd been diagnosed with gallstones and needed surgery. Not critically dangerous, but still surgery under general anesthesia. No joke at my age. I remembered that day with crystal clarity. The white walls of the hospital room, the smell of antiseptic, the nurse checking the IV. I woke up from the anesthesia alone. I expected to see my son, but the room was empty. I called Ambrose a week before the surgery. I continued. He knew the date, the time, the name of the hospital. He said he'd be there, but he didn't show up that day or the next. I called a cab to get home. The nurse tried to talk me out of it. It was too early. I should stay under observation. But stubbornness has always been my trait. I signed the necessary paperwork and left, overcome with pain and nausea. 3 days later, Ambrose did show up, I said, looking out the window at the snowy street. Shaksharai, with a bouquet he'd obviously bought at the nearest supermarket, and with an explanation that sounded like rote memorization. Kendall had an important home showing for an influential client, and he couldn't help but support her. I remembered the look on my son's face, a mixture of guilt and stubbornness. He stood in the doorway of my house, hesitant to enter, as if he were a stranger. I didn't make a scene, I said to Theodore. I just asked him if showing the house was more important than my father's health. Do you know what he said? It wasn't just a showing, Dad. It's an opportunity for Kendall to take her career to the next level. You've always said yourself that career is important. Theodore shook his head. He twisted your words. Exactly, I grinned bitterly. I taught him that work should be satisfying, that you should strive for professional growth. But I never told him that career was more important than family. Never. What I didn't tell Theodore was that after my son left, I pulled out an album of family photos, found a picture taken when Ambrose was 7 years old and broke his arm falling off his bicycle. I canceled an important meeting to take him to the hospital. We sat in the emergency room for 4 hours and I never left his side. You know what else is interesting? I added. After that conversation, Ambrose didn't call me for 2 months. And when he finally did, he talked only about his work, about some new project to modernize the filtration system. Not a word of apology, not a question about my health. It was as if the incident had never happened. Theodore listened attentively, drumming his fingers on the table, a habit he'd picked up since his court appearances. It's certainly a telling case, he agreed. Still, total disinheritance is a very serious step. I'm not doing this on impulse, Ted. It's the result of much observation and reflection. Yesterday's incident was just a confirmation of what I'd long suspected. My son had betrayed not only me, but himself. He had allowed Kendall to change him, to make him a puppet in her ambitious plans. Theodore nodded silently, then took out fresh documents from his desk drawer. I have drafted a new will, taking into account your wishes. Read it carefully, especially the clauses that exclude Ambrose Pringle and Kendall Pringle from inheritance altogether, and that transfer the entire estate to St. Margaret's Children's Hospital. I picked up the documents and began to read methodically, line by line, as I was accustomed to doing with professional reports. The legal language was dry and unemotional, which suited my current state of mind. Everything is correct, I said, having read to the end. Where do I sign? Theodore took out a pen and pointed to the marked places. I signed, clear, decisive lines, without hesitation or doubt. 2 of Theodore's co-workers were called as witnesses, and they also signed the document, attesting to my capacity and the voluntariness of my decision. That's it, Theodore said, sealing the papers. The new will is effective immediately. The old one is revoked. I felt strangely relieved, as if I'd shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying for too long. Thank you, Ted, for everything. You're welcome. He put the papers back in the folder. But if you change your mind. I won't, I said firmly, standing up. Some doors are better closed definitively. Leaving Theodore's office, I decided to walk, despite the cold and wet snow. I needed time to realize the step I'd taken, to get used to the idea that I was truly alone now. With no heirs, no family, only with the memory of what once was. Almost automatically, my feet led me to Myrtle Collier's house. I knocked on the door, not quite sure what I was looking for here, but knowing I wasn't ready to return to the emptiness of my home. Myrtle opened it almost immediately, as if she had been expecting me. Hubert, she said without surprise, come in. I had just put the kettle on. Her house was the exact opposite of mine. Brightly colored, filled with knickknacks, photographs, and books strewn over every surface. A cozy mess in which she somehow managed to find everything she needed. "I saw you come back yesterday," she said, pouring tea into old-fashioned cups. "Too early for Christmas dinner, and I could tell by the look on your face that it hadn't gone as you'd hoped." "Sure what? That's putting it mildly." I accepted the cup and sat down at her kitchen table, littered with magazines and mail. "Kendall wouldn't even let me in the door." Myrtle snorted. "That woman, I never told you, but I once saw the way she treats people when she thinks no one can see her." I raised an eyebrow. "Tell me about it." "It was last spring. I was coming back from a book club meeting. We were discussing some detective story. I don't remember the title. Anyway, I was driving by that new complex, Lake Hill, and I saw Kendall with an elderly couple. She was showing them the house, all smiles and pleasantries. But when they turned away to look at the garden, the expression on her face changed instantly. Such contempt, Hubert. It was as if she were looking at insects. And then one of them, a man, asked for a discount, and she smiled again. But the eyes, if looks could kill, he would have dropped dead. I nodded. That was consistent with my observations. "And your son?" Myrtle asked, refilling the tea. "Did he even try to intervene?" "He turned away," I said quietly. "He was standing in the hallway and just turned away when our eyes met." Myrtle shook her head. "Oh, Hubert, I'm so sorry. Ambrose was always such a sweet boy. I remember him helping me with my shopping when my Harold was still alive." "He's changed," I said. "Or maybe I never really knew him. What are you going to do now?" "I already have." I sipped my tea. "Changed the will this morning. Excluded them both." To my surprise, Myrtle nodded with approval. "That's right. You can't let people use you, even if it's your own blood, especially if it's your own blood. Don't you think I've been too cruel?" "Cruel?" Myrtle snorted. "Cruel is when a son lets his wife humiliate his own father on his doorstep on Christmas Day. Cruel is when he doesn't even have the courage to call and apologize. You're just protecting yourself, and it's the right thing to do." Her words sounded like an echo of my own thoughts, and it brought a strange comfort. Maybe I wasn't as wrong as I'd secretly feared. We sat with Myrtle for nearly 2 hours, reminiscing about the past, the times when Ambrose was little, when Lorraine was alive, when the future seemed full of possibilities instead of disappointments. When I got home, I found my phone literally bursting with calls. 10 missed ones, all from Kendall, none from Ambrose. The voicemail indicator blinked, signaling new messages. I didn't bother listening to them. Instead, I sat down at my desk and started recording the time of each call, like I'd once done at work, analyzing suspect activity. The first call came in at 11:05 in the morning, then two more 5 minutes apart. An hour's break, probably a lunch meeting or a real estate showing. Then a series of 4 calls between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, and the last 3 between 4 and 5. Interesting that she called exactly during business hours, when she was usually busy with clients. So it was really urgent for her. But why? I doubted she was suddenly overcome with remorse for yesterday. The phone rang again as I analyzed my notes. Kendall's name popped up on the screen. I stared at the flashing display, but made no attempt to answer. On the 5th ring, she left another voice message. Curiosity. A professional habit took over, though, and I decided to listen to at least the last message. "Hubert, it's me again." Kendall's voice sounded strained with feigned concern. "I'm really worried about you. After yesterday, I'm afraid you may have misunderstood the situation. We really need to talk. It's important. Please call me back as soon as possible." I deleted the message and put my phone on silent. Then I pulled a notepad out of my desk drawer and started making a list of tasks for the next few days. The first item was visit St. Margaret's Children's Hospital. I wanted to get a first-hand look at the organization that was now my sole heir. The phone continued to silently flash the new calls indicator. Kendall was persistent, I had to admit that. But now that the decision had been made and the papers signed, her persistence didn't matter. The door was closed, forever. December 26th was surprisingly sunny. The winter sun was shining through the curtains when I woke up at 5:30 sharp again, as always. Some habits stay the same, even when the world is falling apart. I perform my morning ritual with mechanical precision. Hygiene routine, a cup of strong black tea, looking at the newspaper. An ordinary morning that reminded me of yesterday's shock in no way. But inside I felt empty and strangely numb, as if a part of me had shut down, protecting myself from pain. The first thing I did was check my phone. 34 missed calls from Kendall and none from Ambrose. That ratio said a lot about my daughter-in-law and son's priorities. Turning the phone on mute, I heard an almost immediate ringing. Kendall, amazing persistence for someone who had slammed the door in my face yesterday. I decided not to answer and continued reading the paper. The Eastport Herald with a Christmas theme on the front page, the mayor lighting the lights in the main square, the traditional parade, a fundraiser for an orphanage, the usual holiday news in a small town with nothing much going on. The phone rang twice more while I was eating breakfast. I ignored it with the stubbornness of someone who has made a decision and is not going to back down. After breakfast, I decided to clean up my office, a job I'd been putting off for a long time. Old documents needed sorting, some needed shredding. I was always reassured by methodical activity that required attention to detail. I immersed myself in sorting through the papers, disconnected from the outside world and thoughts of my son. The doorbell rang around 11. It was insistent, demanding, unrelenting. I knew who it was before I looked out the window and saw Kendall's black Lexus parked outside my house, her executive car for important clients and special occasions. I didn't rush to open it. Let her wait a small revenge for last night's humiliation on her doorstep. The bell rang again, more insistently. Finally, I opened the door. Kendall stood on the porch, dressed in an elegant coat the color of coffee and milk, with perfect hair and makeup. Not a trace of yesterday's animosity, just the concern and professional smile of a realtor, ready to convince her client of a good deal. "Hubert, at last," she exclaimed with relief. "I was so worried. You didn't answer the phone?" I didn't step back to let her into the house, nor did I return the greeting. I just stared, noting the details. The overly intense eye contact typical of people trying to appear sincere. The slight tilt of her head to look vulnerable. The hands clutching the expensive purse a little tighter than necessary. "I didn't answer on purpose," I said flatly. "I have no desire to talk to you." Her face froze for a moment, but she quickly restored the mask of concern. "I understand you're upset about yesterday, but it was all a misunderstanding. May I come in?" "It's cold outside." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, eye for an eye. But I hadn't been brought up for petty revenge. "5 minutes," I said, backing away. Kendall entered, looking around the hallway as if she hadn't been here in a long time, though the last visit had been only 6 months ago, when she and Ambrose had stopped by for 10 minutes to check on me. "Your house is always so cozy," she said, taking off her coat and hanging it on the coat rack, with a casualness that betrayed her possessive intentions. I often tell my clients that old houses have a special atmosphere that new buildings don't. I ignored the realtor's babble and pointed to the living room. "You wanted to talk. Go ahead." We sat down, me in my usual chair, she on the couch, straightening the skirt of her impeccable business suit. "Hubert, I must apologize for yesterday," she began, leaning forward. "It was a terrible misunderstanding. Ambrose and I wanted to see you at the party, of course. But you were late, 5 minutes late," I interrupted. "The invitation was for 6. I arrived at 6:05. She frowned slightly, the tiniest wrinkle between her perfectly plucked eyebrows. "Really? I thought we set it for 5. Anyway, by the time you got here, the business round of the party had already begun. Important clients, potential investors. You know, in my line of work, connections are everything." I noticed her right hand lightly rubbing her bracelet, an unconscious gesture that betrayed the lie. Another trick in the forensic scientist's arsenal, noticing inconsistencies between words and body language. "You were very clear yesterday. Why are you here?" "You're not welcome." That doesn't sound like a confusion of timing. Kendall blushed, a slight blush she tried to hide by lowering her head. I was on edge. Those clients could have brought in a contract worth millions. I just lost my temper. "I shouldn't have taken it out on you. I'm really sorry." Her apology sounded rote, like a textbook on business etiquette. I didn't believe a word of it. "Why are you here, Kendall?" I asked bluntly. "Why 34 calls in one day?" She straightened, adjusting the collar of her blouse. Another defensive gesture. I was worried about you. You left upset in the snow. Don't insult my intelligence, I said quietly. We both know you've never worried about me. So let's skip the small talk and get to the point. Her mask of polite concern trembled. Something cold, calculating flashed in her eyes. She was assessing the situation, reassessing her strategy. All right, she said at last. I heard you saw your lawyer this morning. That's it. Small town, everybody knows everybody. Someone must have seen me entering Theodore's office and jumped to conclusions. I don't have to account for my actions, I replied. Of course not, she smiled strangely. It's just, after our little misunderstanding, I was thinking, you didn't do anything rash, did you? I smiled, not a warm smile, but more like a predator's grin. I didn't do anything rash? Quite the opposite. I've thought it over very carefully. Her face froze, her mask cracking completely. You changed the will. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I neither confirmed nor denied it, but watched her reaction. Hubert, she suddenly changed her tone to one of intimacy and trust, as if we were old friends in a difficult situation. I understand you're upset, but decisions made in anger are rarely wise. Why don't we discuss this calmly? Maybe with Ambrose. He's at work right now, but I could call him. Don't bother. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. My decision wasn't made in anger. It was made after carefully analyzing the situation. After years of watching you manipulate my son, alienating him from me, after numerous incidents of neglect on his part, yesterday's incident was just the last straw. Kendall stood up as well, her eyes narrowing. You can't just disinherit Ambrose. He's your only son. I can, I replied calmly, and I did. It's not fair. Her voice rose. He's your blood relative. Justice, I said, is not about getting something you don't deserve just because you're related to someone. Justice is getting what you deserve by your actions. The mask finally came off. The real Kendall was standing in front of me, calculating, cold, furious that her plans were falling apart. You're going to regret this, she hissed. She will contest the will, will prove you were out of your mind. I laughed, genuinely heartily. Try. I'm a former forensic expert with an impeccable reputation. The will was drawn up by one of the best lawyers in the city, with all the formalities. You have no proof of my incapacity, and after this conversation, it will be obvious that this is not about my mental state, but about your greed. She opened her mouth to say something, but at that moment there was the sound of a car pulling up. We both turned to the window and saw Ambrose's old pickup truck parked behind Kendall's Lexus. Her face changed instantly from fury to panic. Did you tell him? No, I answered, but I was going to. A minute later, there was a knock on the door. I opened it and saw my son, not in a business suit like yesterday, but in the work clothes of the city water department. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and 2 days of stubble. Dad, he nodded at me, then noticed Kendall's car. Is she here? I stepped back, letting him pass. In the living room. Ambrose walked in, his movements stiff, as if he felt like a stranger in the house he'd grown up in. I suddenly realized I couldn't remember the last time he'd been here alone, without Kendall. Years? Yeah, I guess. What are you doing here? He asked when he saw his wife. You said you were on your way to a client meeting. Kendall walked quickly over to him, put her hand on his shoulder. I was worried about your father after yesterday. I wanted to make sure he was okay. Ambrose frowned, looking at her in disbelief. Apparently, even he wasn't buying this sudden concern. I came to apologize, he told me, ignoring Kendall. For yesterday, it was wrong. I looked at my son carefully. For the first time in a long time, he spoke without a memorized tone, without regard for his wife's reaction. Why didn't you intervene? I asked him directly. Why did you let her make me look like an unwanted beggar? He lowered his eyes. I chickened out. There were important people there. Kendall said our future depended on this evening. Your future didn't depend on business contacts. It depended on your ability to do the right thing, I said. You chose wrong. Don't talk to him like that, Kendall intervened. You're always criticizing him, always dissatisfied. No wonder he chose me over you. Ambrose raised his hand, stopping her. No, Kendall, he's right. I should have intervened. She stared at him in disbelief. You're defending him after everything we've discussed? I'm not defending him. I'm admitting my mistake. Ambrose's voice sounded tired but firm. I came to talk to my father alone. Please wait in the car. Kendall gasped with indignation. Alone? Are you kidding me? After what he did? Ambrose frowned. What are you talking about? Your father, she jabbed a finger at me, just disinherited you. Everything. The house, the money, everything that was rightfully yours. There was silence. Ambrose slowly shifted his gaze from Kendall to me. Is it true? I nodded. Yes. I changed my will this morning. My entire estate will go to St. Margaret's Children's Hospital. His face didn't express shock or outrage, only weariness and something akin to humility. I understand. Do you understand? Kendall was almost screaming. He's robbed us of everything, and you just nod? There's hundreds of thousands worth of antiques in this house alone, not to mention the value of the building itself. Ambrose gave her a long look. So that's what's really bothering you. Not your relationship with my father, but money. Don't be an idiot, she snapped at him. Of course I care about the relationship, but you can't ignore the financial side. We were counting on those funds for our future. You? I asked quietly. Or was it just you, Kendall? She turned to me, her face contorted with rage. Don't you dare accuse me of greed. I've always cared about our family's future. Unlike some people, she turned to Ambrose again, who are content with a miserable job in the city sewers. Ambrose shuddered as if slapped. I work in the water treatment system. I provide clean drinking water for the city. It's an important job. Important? She laughed harshly and unpleasantly. Important to who? You. For your precious daddy, who doesn't even respect your choices? Who always thought you weren't ambitious enough? Not successful enough? Ambrose turned to me, pain in his eyes. Is that true? Have you always been ashamed of my work? I shook my head. No. I was never ashamed of your profession. I was proud that you found a cause that you thought was important. I was only disappointed that you didn't seek to grow within your field, settled for little. But shame, never. Liar. Kendall lashed out. You always looked down on him, always criticizing him, always pushing your expectations. And you don't? I asked calmly. Didn't you just call his work pathetic? Didn't you constantly insinuate that he should conform to the standards of your world? Didn't you turn him into a shadow of yourself? Ambrose looked from me to Kendall, as if he were seeing us both for the first time. I want to talk to my father alone, he repeated. Please wait in the car. Kendall stared at him in shock for a second, then grabbed her purse. Fine. Talk to him, but don't expect me to sit around and wait while you choose between me and the man who disowned you. She flew out of the house, slamming the door. A minute later, we heard the roar of the Lexus's engine, pulling away. Ambrose and I were alone, in the heavy silence that seemed to fill the house. Sit down, I said, pointing to a chair. He sat down, slouching, staring at his hands, the hands of a working man, with rough skin and the marks of daily labor. I was always afraid of disappointing you, he said quietly. You were so impeccable, a respected expert, a man whose word meant something in court. And I just wanted to do something useful, something real. You've never disappointed me with your work, I replied, only by your choice to turn your back on me for a woman who sees you not as a man, but as a means to an end. He looked up, his eyes a mixture of resentment and tired recognition. You've always been cold, Dad, always demanding, always analyzing my every move, every decision. I never felt I was good enough for you. His words struck to the heart because there was some truth in them. I really was a demanding father, maybe too demanding. I wanted you to be the best version of yourself, I said, but I never stopped loving you, even when I was disappointed by your decisions. And now? He asked, looking me straight in the eye. Do you love me now that you disinherited me? I held his gaze. Love and inheritance are different things, Ambrose. I disinherited a son who allowed his wife to humiliate me, who didn't have the courage to intervene, who spent years alienating me under her influence. But that doesn't mean I stopped loving that little boy who ran around this house, who laughed with Lorraine in the kitchen, who brought me his school projects with pride in his eyes. Ambrose lowered his head, and I noticed his shoulders trembling. He was crying, quietly, discreetly, like a grown man who hadn't allowed himself tears in a long time. "I lost myself, Daddy," he whispered. "Somewhere along the way I just lost myself." I wanted to go over and hug him, like I'd done when he was a kid. But there was a chasm of years of estrangement between us that couldn't be crossed with one move. "You can find yourself again," I said instead. "But only you. No one else can do it for you." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, the way he used to do when I was a kid. "Kendall's not so bad," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "She's just ambitious, wants more." "There's nothing wrong with ambition," I replied. "What's wrong is sacrificing those around you for it." Ambrose stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where his wife's car had recently been parked. "She's not coming back for me," he said with a bitter grin. "Not after what you said about the inheritance." I remained silent. We both knew he was right. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked. And in that question I heard an echo of the boy he had once been, a child seeking his father's advice. "It's your choice," I answered. "Always has been and always will be yours alone." He turned to me, and I saw in his eyes a strange mixture of fear and determination. "I have to go. I need to think about everything." I nodded. "Sure." He headed for the door but stopped on the threshold. "Dad, are you really going to change the will back?" If I shook my head. "No, Ambrose. This isn't about buying your attention or affection. My decision is final. But that doesn't mean there can't be a relationship between us, a real one, not based on expectations of inheritance." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand, and I guess I respect that decision, though I can't say it doesn't hurt." With those words, he walked out, closing the door much more quietly than his wife. I was alone in the empty house, with a heavy heart and a strange feeling that I had just lost my son for good. But at the same time, I saw in him a glimpse of the man he could have become without Kendall's destructive influence. Walking to the window, I watched as he got into his vintage pickup truck and slowly drove away. Not Ambrose the puppet in the hands of an ambitious wife, but Ambrose the water engineer, the man who did important, albeit unnoticed work. I realized with final clarity, my son had long ago become a stranger. But perhaps only today had he begun the journey to becoming himself again. The decision did not come instantly, but gradually, like a tide that approaches the shore imperceptibly but steadily. For 3 weeks after the Christmas events, I lived in a strange limbo. I followed the usual rituals, getting up at 5:30, making tea, reading the newspaper. But inside, I felt a growing need for change. Ambrose never showed up at my house again. He called twice, brief, awkward conversations, full of pauses and innuendo. He didn't mention Kendall, and I didn't ask. But from certain phrases, from the tone of voice, I realized there was no breakup. She was too deeply ingrained in his life, too much bent to his will. Myrtle stopped by almost every day, bringing home-baked goods and town gossip. From her, I learned that Kendall was spreading rumors about my senile dementia and ingratitude toward my only son. I only chuckled. Small town, small people, small intrigue. It was Myrtle who first asked if I'd thought about moving. "Why stay where there's nothing to keep you?" she said, pouring tea into my finest china cups. Harold and I had always dreamed of a house on the coast of Maine after he retired. We didn't have time. Her words struck a chord with me. Really, what was keeping me in Eastport? A house full of memories of Lorraine? A son who chose a different path? The reputation of a respected retired forensics expert? That same evening, I pulled out a map of New England and began exploring the small coastal towns. Not too touristy, not too secluded. A place to start over where no one knows your history, your frustrations, your mistakes. The choice was Harbor Haven, a small town in Maine, a 2.5-hour drive from Eastport. A coastal community with a historic center, a small college, and one of the best crime labs in the region. That last fact was crucial. I didn't want to just live out my days by the sea. I wanted to be useful, to apply the knowledge and experience I had accumulated over 4 decades of work. Cold case consultant is the perfect position for someone of my age and qualifications. The decision to move finally matured in mid-January. I called Theodore to discuss the legal aspects of selling the house. He didn't express surprise. He must have expected something like this. "Would you like me to put you in touch with a good realtor?" he asked. "I know someone who is honest, not from your sister-in-law's company." "I'd appreciate it," I replied. Richard Oakes, the realtor Theodore recommended, was a man about my age, practical and unpretentious. He inspected the house, assessed its condition, location, and historical value. "Excellent object," he said. "Taking into account all the factors, we can put up for $850,000. We'll find a buyer quickly. Houses like this in Eastport's historic district are worth their weight in gold." I agreed, signed the necessary documents. Within a week, a for sale sign with contact information for the Oaks agency appeared on the front lawn. It didn't take long to get a reaction. That same evening, I got a call. Kendall. I didn't answer, but she left a message full of ill-concealed panic. "Hubert, what's going on? Why are you selling the house? It's an impulsive decision. You shouldn't be doing this. Please call me back. We can talk about this." I deleted the message, didn't call back. The next day she arrived in person, but I didn't answer the door. I saw through the window as she stood on the doorstep, called, knocked, then drove away in her black Lexus, tires squealing, breaking the speed limit of the quiet neighborhood. Another day later, Ambrose showed up. I decided to open the door. A son, after all, not a stranger, despite everything. "Dad," he started right from the door. "What's going on? Why are you selling the house?" I invited him in. He stepped cautiously across the threshold, looking around as if expecting to see some drastic change. "I'm moving," I said simply. "To Harbor Haven, Maine. Got a job there as a consultant in a crime lab." Ambrose looked at me in disbelief. "But why? Is it because of me and Kendall? Because of what happened at Christmas?" I shook my head. "Not exactly. It's because of me. I need a new chapter in my life, a new place, new people, new opportunities." "But this house, this is your whole life." He circled the living room, where every single thing held the history of our family. "Mom's here. Lorraine isn't in these walls," I said softly. "She is in my memories, and they will come with me." Ambrose looked confused, as if he couldn't comprehend what was happening. "Kendall is very upset." I grinned bitterly. "I'm sure she is. I'm sure she is, because her plans for this house are now ruined." My son shuddered as if struck by a blow. "It's not fair. She really cares." "Don't lie," I interrupted, "at least to yourself." He was silent, his head down. We sat in silence, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock, a gift from my father for my marriage to Lorraine. "That clock is coming with me too, one of the few things I've decided to keep." "When are you leaving?" Ambrose finally asked. "As soon as I sell the house. According to the realtor, that could happen very quickly." "And you're just going to leave? Without saying goodbye?" I looked at my son carefully. There was resentment in his voice, but something else. Fear, maybe? The realization that the bond between us was really breaking, and this time irreversibly. "I'm talking to you now," I answered. "And I'll be glad to see you before I leave." "Just you, Ambrose. Not Kendall." He stood up, clearly hurt by that condition. "She's my wife. We are one." Then I have nothing more to say. I stood up too. "Good luck, son." He left, slamming the door not as loud as his wife, but loud enough to protest. I didn't take offense. I understood his feelings. It's hard to accept that your father is uprooting everything that was once important and starting a new life with no regard for the past. The process of selling the house was really quick. The first potential buyers, a middle-aged couple from Boston, fell in love with the house at first sight. They offered the full amount without bargaining, the only condition being that the former owner move out quickly. I accepted. I had nothing to hold on to. In 67 years of life, I had accumulated surprisingly few things to which I was truly attached. An antique clock, a collection of forensic books, photo albums, a few pieces of furniture that Lorraine had once picked out. Everything else could have been sold, given away, or thrown away without regret. I spent 2 weeks unpacking, packing what would go with me, selling what would remain. Myrtle helped, bringing acquaintances who could buy furniture, dishes, garden tools. I wasn't looking for profit. I just wanted the things that had served me well to find new owners who would take care of them. The day before I signed the final sale papers, I received a letter. An envelope with the Eastport Municipal Water Service logo, a printed address, no handwritten inscription. I knew right away it was from Ambrose. The letter was short, printed on official letterhead. Dear Father, I sincerely apologize for the events that occurred during the Christmas season. I regret that our family relationship did not work out properly. I hope for your understanding and wish you all the best in your new residence. Sincerely, Ambrose Pringle. Every word screamed that the letter had been written at Kendall's dictation. No personal note, no sincerity, just formal phrases that could have been addressed to a business associate, not a father. I folded the letter and tucked it away in my desk drawer. Perhaps someday Ambrose would realize how false it sounded. Maybe someday he'd write me a real letter, from his heart, not his wife's dictation, or call, or come to visit. I wasn't going to close that door, but I wasn't going to wait on her either. Instead of answering this formal letter, I decided to leave my own message. Not for the puppet Ambrose, but for the Ambrose I had once known, an honest, sincere boy with a pure heart. I wrote a short note, put it in an envelope, and took it to Theodore. I want you to keep this, I said, handing it to him. Only give it to Ambrose if he comes to you, without Kendall, and asks about me. Not about the inheritance, not about the papers, but about me personally. Theodore nodded, understanding without further explanation. And if he doesn't? Then burn the envelope, I replied. Then my son is really gone. In the note were simple words. The real inheritance is not in money or property. It's about maintaining your dignity, even when it's the hardest thing to do. It's about staying true to yourself despite the pressures of others. That's what I've been trying to teach you all my life. If you're reading this, it's a lesson learned. I've always loved you, son, and I always will, no matter what happens. Your father, Hubert. The last day in Eastport was clear and cold. The February sun poured into the empty rooms of my former home, playing on the polished surfaces of the few remaining pieces of furniture the new owners had agreed to buy with the house. I walked around each room saying goodbye. To the kitchen, where Lorraine made her famous pies. The dining room, where we celebrated all the family holidays. Ambrose's nursery, where he collected model airplanes and read books about dinosaurs. The bedroom Lorraine and I shared for 35 years, where she died in my arms from a sudden aneurysm. Myrtle came to see me off, bringing a thermos of hot tea and a container of sandwiches for the road. We hugged goodbye. Right, she said, wiping away her tears. And come visit whenever you want. My door's always open. I will, I replied, knowing I probably wouldn't come back. Some doors are best closed forever. After loading the last of the boxes into the trunk of my Volvo, I got behind the wheel and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw my house, no longer mine, perched on a hill with a for sale sign on the lawn. At that moment, a familiar pickup truck appeared on the street. Ambrose stopped a few feet away from me, got out of the car. He was in work clothes, apparently coming straight from a shift at the wastewater treatment plant. I rolled down the window. We stared at each other across the space that separated us, physically and emotionally. You're really leaving, he said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Yes, I replied. Tyranny. The papers are signed. The house is sold. He nodded, shuffling from foot to foot as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Good luck in Harbor Haven, he said at last, with the new job and everything else. Thanks, I nodded. Good luck to you too. With everything. Ambrose took a step forward, then stopped, as if he'd hit an invisible wall. At that moment, a black Lexus appeared on the street. Kendall pulled up next to her husband's pickup, rolled down the window. Ambrose, I've been looking everywhere for you. We have a meeting with the designer in 20 minutes. My son flinched, looked back at his wife, then looked at me again. I have to go. Sure, I nodded, watching history repeat itself. He picked her out again, turned away from me again. Nothing had changed. Goodbye, Dad, he said quietly. Goodbye, son, I replied, lifting the glass. Ambrose walked toward his wife's car. I didn't wait to see if he would get into the Lexus or go back to his pickup. I put it in gear and slowly pulled out of the driveway. The drive to Harbor Haven took almost 3 hours. I drove leisurely, savoring the views of winter New England, the snow-covered fields, the forests, the small towns floating by outside the window. With each mile, I felt the weight of the past gradually let go of me. My new home, a small cottage on the outskirts of Harbor Haven, overlooking the bay, was much more modest than the Eastport mansion. 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, a study that I planned to turn into a home laboratory for working on cold cases. I unloaded the car, brought in the boxes, arranged the few pieces of furniture I'd brought with me. The last thing I pulled out was an antique clock, the one thing that had accompanied me all my life. I put it on the mantelpiece and wound it up. Its measured ticking filled the empty house, making it feel a little more settled. I spent the evening on the terrace, looking out over the dark waters of the bay. No one in Harbor Haven knew me, my history, my frustrations. Tomorrow I would start work at the local crime lab, consulting on old unsolved cases, applying the experience and knowledge I had accumulated during my years of service. I'll be useful, needed. That's all I wanted at the end of my life. There was still bitterness in my heart, at the loss of my son, at the collapse of my hopes, at the realization that the Pringle family line would probably end with me. But along with the bitterness was a strange sense of release. No more false hopes, no more self-deception, no more trying to earn the love of those who were incapable of giving it. I took a deep breath of salty sea air. There was a new chapter ahead of me, perhaps the last chapter of my life, but no less meaningful. And I was ready to write it in my own way, without regard for the past, without fear of the future. That was my choice, not escape, but liberation. Not surrender, but acceptance of reality. Not an end, but a new beginning. In my pocket, I fumbled for an old photograph. Ambrose, at 7 years old, smiling, with a front tooth knocked out, holding a model airplane in his hands. I couldn't leave it in Eastport, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself to let go of the past completely. Some connections can't be broken, even if you try hard enough. I tucked the picture back into my pocket and walked into the house, closing the door behind me. Not with the slam of a hurt man, but with the quiet determination of someone who knows he's doing the right thing. Tomorrow would be a new day, the first day of my new life, and I was ready to face it with an open heart and a clear mind. Without illusions, but also without despair. Just like a man who had finally realized a simple truth, sometimes you have to walk away to be truly free.